it's all we can do, I'm afraid. So, firstly, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining the first of these BCFA business webinars, surviving COVID-19. The thought of the webinars was actually to really look at what happens towards the end of the lockdown period. So what happens as we come out of the lockdown period and we start to trade, I guess, more normally, or in the new norm, as everybody keeps talking. My name's Mark Spragg. I'm from a company called Now Consulting. We're a management consultancy that really help companies, help our clients to grow. So very heavily focused on sales and channel, but also around improving profitability. And we are also chartered management accountants in the team. And we're delighted to really be able to support the BCFA in this initiative. I'm joined on today's call, unfortunately, without video for no apparent reason, by Jeremy from the BCFA, who you'll already know, by Ramsay Smith from a company called Media House, that are a media company that specialise in crisis situations and crisis management. And lastly, but not least, by Alan McKee, who is from MacDonald Henderson, and Alan really specialises in business law and conflict resolution. All of the panelists on this call have direct experience of the contract furniture business, and we therefore hope we can provide practical and relevant thoughts to your sectors and your companies as you look to navigate through the next phase of this pandemic. As I've already said, this session really is going to focus on cash flow and scenario planning for the future. So we're not going to, in this webinar, look at the CBIL loan scheme nor the job retention scheme. However, we do recognise that that many people have got many questions on this, and obviously as a panel, we have a fair amount of knowledge on this sector, so on these issues. So if you do have questions as we go through the session with regards to either the CBIL scheme or the loan job retention scheme, then please do let us know via the chat, via the question function, and we will come back to the participants after the webinar with an answer to all on the questions that are raised. In terms of the webinar itself, just across the bottom of your screen, if you haven't used Zoom before, there is a function or a bar with a function on which includes a Q&A section. And we'd like to make this webinar as interactive as possible and to answer the questions that are really relevant to you and your businesses. So as we go through, if you have questions either on the topics raised or on something that we haven't raised relating to the topic, please do ask the questions. We will try and answer them on the webinar, subject obviously to time, and if we can't answer them, either because we run out of time or because we are in a position where where it's something that we really need some technical help from one of our other team members, for anybody on of the panelists, we will come back by the end of the day with the answers to those questions. Lastly, with regards to the Q&A, if you want to ask a question anonymously, you can do so. As you come to post your question, it will ask whether you want to send it anonymously. If you click on that box, then neither the panelists nor anybody else on the call can see who raised the question. So as we move into the session, before we started, we thought it was probably a good opportunity to hear a little bit from Jeremy with regards to the actions that the BCFA are taking on behalf of its members at the moment, both in discussions with government bodies and also other trade bodies with regards to obviously what's happening right now with some of the support schemes, but also as we move forward. So Jeremy, like I say, I'm sorry we haven't got video, but at this moment I'll hand over to you, and you can maybe update the members on what's happening from the BCFA end.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Before I just go on to what we've been doing, I think it might just help just put a bit of scenario setting on how the different sectors are behaving, because we all sort of, the membership operates in, quite siloed, not siloed, but in different areas. And I'm also going to include the retail sector, because a number of BCFA members operate in that area. And we work with the BFM, who are the trade association for the retail manufacturers. So I'll start with that. I mean, for the retail sector has pretty much from the day they told the retail sector to shut down, the retail manufacturers shut down. Their problems are perhaps worse than the contract sector because of the credit periods that they grant to retailers. So furniture they were delivering in November, December and January still haven't been paid for. And that's why that area is absolutely essential that the retail market reopens. And we've already seen some big companies go into administration. JDP Furniture Group, who are major suppliers to Laura Ashley, have gone. And I think there are quite a few others. Within the contract sector, it's mixed. The vast majority of businesses have closed down the manufacturing. The care sector, a significant number of BCFA members do operate there, are largely still busy supplying to the NHS and the care sector, care houses. And other BCFA members have got involved as far as they could in supplying products, whether that is PPE, the protective clothing or other furniture, as much as they can, but it doesn't replace their normal products. The office sector pretty much shut down within a week or so of the lockdown, but have been continuing to get orders. And potentially when the lockdown is lifted and we can get back to business, they're probably in I would hope, a relatively better position to be able to start trading quite quickly. Hospitality suppliers, that is perhaps more worrying in that it's not clear when the hospitality sector is going to open up again, and that might be more protracted. Generally, when this was going back 3-4 weeks ago, most people I spoke to, most managers said they had cash flow, they had cash reserves of around 6 weeks to 2 months. We're now 3-4 weeks into that. The government subsequently issued various loans and furloughing, so that position may be slightly better, but obviously protracted lockdown, if they announce it, there is talk of May the 8th, but there are also words coming out of government that could be the end of May, is realistically when things are open up again. So we've taken all that into account, and we operate with, as part of the BFC, which is the British Furniture Confederation, which is a partnership of ourselves, BFM, Bed Federation, FIRA, and the furniture makers. And we've been campaigning and trying to educate government about the problems in our sector. We have an all-party parliamentary group led by Mike Wood, and he's been fighting the case for an extension of the business rates holiday to our sector. And we're continuing with that. We've had a big campaign to get our members to write to MPs, and that's ongoing. And we're not the only sector that's doing this, so we're still hoping that will happen. But what we're probably doing now is actually looking to the future and trying to educate governments, and they are listening. Well, we believe they're listening. They're asking for information. Is how we come out of this. If you have a scenario where the lockdown is lifted and the support is lifted, my great fear is that all that happens is that companies will just fall over 1 month, 2 months after that because the market hasn't picked up, and that's my big fear for the hospitality area in particular, because that's probably the area that will be lifted last because of social mixing restrictions. So we're looking for examples of how from our members of how things are affecting our business. So if you haven't done so already, if our members can contact me just to give information to government, because they need to know this. It's not straightforward. It's not a magic wand solution to this. Support for our manufacturings in particular must last for months after the lifting. Otherwise, we will see potentially see a large number of companies go into administration because the market just won't pick up in time. So that's what we're working on. As I said, at this point, the government are listening, and I'm hopeful that they'll do the right thing. So that's really where we are, Mark.
Thank you, Jeremy. So obviously, you know, it's really important that members do get in touch. So if you know, particularly if you're in the hospitality area, you know, get those comments across to Jeremy, and hopefully we can. You know, the BCFA will be able to influence and move things forward. Just for the three panelists, I've just gone back in and tried to reset the video. So if you could just try and click your video, maybe it will work. I'm hoping it might work. If not, we can keep moving.
Not from me.
I'm afraid not.
Okay. in that case, I have no clue. So, you know, as we move on to starting to think about scenario and cash flow planning, I think all businesses are facing the same questions at the moment, as is the wider society. The first one being, when will the lockdown end? When will sales return to pre-COVID levels? And if they don't, where will they be? For many of us, we're looking at this and thinking, wondering whether our customers will actually survive, or indeed our supply chain. And last but not least, we have that question about social distancing as this goes on before an antiviral comes into play. Just how operational are our businesses, you know, as we move forward with social distancing? So all those things are sort of variables as we look to think about managing our businesses. And of course, that all has an impact on cash, and really conserving cash flow and managing cash flow is crucial right now as we look to the short-term loans of paying the fixed costs with no income. But of course, as we move forward, will continue and in some ways become more complicated for many businesses, particularly in the contract furniture sector that aren't in retail, even the ones that are in retail. There is a delay between actually shipping goods and receiving payment, which means we're all going to have to fund a cash flow build up again once this all gets going. And all of those elements have different scenarios. So we would, as we, you know, at a high level, strongly recommend that every business starts to use this time to start thinking about what are those different scenarios. And you don't need a complicated financial model for this. A simple 10-line sheet that you can add for smaller businesses, particularly, that you can add your expected sales receipts, not sales invoicing, but sales receipts, and costs and all your standing orders into, and then change the different parameters of those. The lockdown ends in May, first receipt will be in August, or whatever it may be, will allow you to start to make some decisions and also plan on just exactly what your business is going to look like as you come back up. What can you afford to bring it back up as? How quickly is it going to come back? And what are you likely to need in terms of funding, and how can you access that as we restart production? So there's a lot really to think about, and I guess at the front of that, Alan, is the whole issue of, frankly, being paid, recognizing that cash flow risk as we move forward. Our customers may not be as financially robust as they were when we headed into this, may not be able to pay at all. So how can we think about and have those conversations with customers with regards to our credit terms, late payments, stage payments, etc., as we move into the post-COVID lockdown period?
Morning, everyone, and thanks, Mark. Before I answer that question, I just wanted to reiterate something Jeremy had said, is the government are listening at the moment. So as a lawyer and from a legal perspective, organisations such as this have a voice that perhaps they didn't have as strongly before. The government are not experts on every sector. they're fighting fires and they're looking for input. So please do filter your thoughts through, because you have a chance to make legislative change. Again, morning everyone. To answer the question, Mark, cash flow in the post-COVID world is going to be an issue. Again, Jeremy had touched on the thing is, well, everyone's trying to get through this period. Support will be required, and a lot of thought and planning will be required in the aftermath. I think now is a great time for all businesses to look at their terms and conditions. You mentioned about T's and C's. Contract is always king in any scenario where obligations are not being performed. At the moment, you have the entire legal profession working from home with plenty of time to look at and give you advice on your existing terms, because you were talking about furniture being delivered and not yet paid for. First things first is what can you do about that? Now your terms and conditions are probably already out there regulating that contract, so it's a good idea, if you haven't done so already, to get a handle on what your existing terms are. And it would surprise you how many people don't really know. It's not the type of thing that chapter and verse, but it's worth having a quick review. And if you need any advice on it, get in touch with your legal advisors just to understand what you can and cannot do to try and perhaps enforce payment or do something else. The provisions in contracts will cover things like force majeure, is a phrase that some people may be aware of, but they almost certainly won't have provided specifically for a global pandemic, which effectively closes down business and social activities. But there will be somewhat, the wording of those clauses will certainly be relevant, and it's worth having a handle on that. After the event, recovering debts at the moment is possible. There are a number of things that you can do. The courts, though, are largely closed to non-essential business. Certainly in Scotland, I think the same is true south of the border. Which makes standard debt recovery actions not possible to lodge or be dealt with by the courts. However, if there is an urgency regarding enforcement, such as diligence, interim diligence, if you're aware of funds being held by the party who owes you money, the courts will deal with ring fencing of assets for a later date, which can be very, very useful. And you can make that case to a court, so that can secure cash or assets at the moment so that they're there when you can litigate thereafter. The post-COVID world, in terms of your terms and conditions, I think is going to be looked at very closely. So anything that you have on contract at the moment will be subject to the existing terms and conditions, but it's open for everybody to amend them after the event. And I would always advise clients to update their terms and conditions on a regular basis based upon changes in the market, changes in the law, etc. So it will be a good time to review them, even at the moment, say, well, this is what we might want to do in the future. Credit terms being one, the 90, 60, 30 days, you might want to be reducing that, making provisions for such things as reservation of title. So title, common law will pass on delivery. Probably, well, I would expect that most members will have carved that out to say that delivery of the firm, passage of title on the goods don't pass to the customer until such times as they've been paid for. That is fundamental. So it's a good time to review them after the event, reducing such things as credit terms, setting out what will happen in the event of a dispute, so that you can very, very quickly identify what is in a breach of contract from a payment perspective, and what route you take to enforce that, to ensure that you get the money in the door. Credit risk is something else which I think should be looked at, is that we're often keen to rush away into an exciting new contract from a new customer or client. Some consideration, and I think after the events that we're dealing with at the moment, people will be a little bit more reluctant to just jump into contracts and start buying kit for supply. It's always a good idea to do a little bit of due diligence on customers or clients, particularly if they're asking for sizable credit terms, or you're having to outlay quite significant sums for the goods. There are a number of insolvency practitioners who can do that due diligence for you, give a little bit of financial health check. Your accountants are good for that too, and indeed us lawyers from time to time. But I suppose my message is, get a handle on the terms and conditions that you have at the moment. You can, of course, amend your terms at any time if you draw them to the attention of the other party. And I think an overall review and a little bit more caution and a little bit tighter on credit control after the event is going to be the key. You're still on mute, Mark.
So thanks for that, Alan. So I think, obviously, as we come out of this, one of the challenges we're going to have is that we're all going to be desperate to hang on to our customers at the same time as actually having to communicate that we may want to change their credit terms or request payment from them. So I guess, Ramsay, from your side, how do we start to think about that, and how do we work our way through that challenge of, on one hand, needing the money in and needing to take potentially a firm view, but on the other hand, retain our customers for the future as we look to trade forward?
Thanks, Matt. Well, good morning, everyone. We are currently advising clients grappling with these issues at the moment. The common thread in all of this, though, is not so much what you do, is how you do it. There has to be some sensitivity in holding these conversations with existing customers, and perhaps even looking for new customers along the way, while at the same time protecting your own cash flow and interests. But when we look around across a number of sectors at the moment, what is a prevalent feeling is that, one, they have to be creating dialogue, and I mean dialogue with stakeholders, rather than just informing them and setting out what they're going to do by diktat. And I think that can't be stressed strongly enough. Everybody understands, the benefit of communication, but in a situation where so many people are working from home and whatever, one of the things that we've noticed across our client base is, actually, are our clients really implementing their communication plans properly and as effectively as possible? And I think that at this stage in the process, having a structured plan, it doesn't need to be particularly elaborate, but setting out a plan where you've got your list of stakeholders, how you communicate with them, what does the engagement look like, being able to measure that engagement, I think would serve businesses well over the piece.
Great, thanks for that, Ramsay. And I guess there comes the really difficult one where you are having to maybe recover debts from a customer. I guess Alan, you'd agree with Ramsay. The first element to that is dialogue and I guess some sort of mediation or discussion to understand their cash flow difficulties, rather than driving them straight to court.
Absolutely. I consider myself to be a dispute resolution lawyer, not the traditional definition of court lawyer. The courts are there as a medium of last resort, and in debt recovery, the key is to try and recover the debt as quickly as possible, and where possible, retaining the relationship. Ramsay was talking about it just moments ago, but in any occasion where I'm recovering debts for clients, one of the first conversations I have with them is commercial awareness. So is it a good idea to ruin a relationship that will remunerate you quite significantly over the next number of years at X amount per annum to recover a relatively small debt if you know that customer is struggling? In my view, you kind of have to sort out in your head very early on, and never more so than when we come out of this period, is who cannot pay, who will not pay, and those who are just at it. So there are people who can't pay for good reasons, which are the same difficulties facing everybody. And then look at who they are in your balance sheet and how good a customer they are. So I think you would want to try and have the dialogue and support the loyal customers. Maybe it's better to have payment over a period of time than to demand and go and get court orders and force them and push them into insolvency. Perhaps look at and it all comes from the dialogue, as Ramsay was saying. If you have a positive dialogue and there's a bit of trust with the customer who might be struggling, you can maybe come to full and final settlement deals, which are a little bit less, that gets early payment. So there's a number of ways that you can do it, and running away to the court with your writ. There'll be plenty of that, by the way, and the courts will be very, very busy, but it's not always the best way to get paid. 100% have some discussions. I suggest that you commence those discussions on a positive nature, sort of trying to understand what issues they're facing and work with them where possible. It's not always possible, to try and get a result which leads to cash flowing into your business without crushing the customer. But of course, what the courts and enforcement orders and statute demands and all these things are for the ones who could clearly pay you and simply have no intention. And when you separate out those into those categories, your decision-making process becomes more straightforward. You look after the good ones and you pursue the ones who are protecting their cash flow to erode yours.
I could just add there, Mark, just to add on what Alan was saying, really, how you handle things can really make or break your reputation in these circumstances.
Absolutely.
You know, we've seen some companies that have gone the extra mile, handled, you know, got the tone right, absolutely enhanced their brand. And there is some research around already that shows that people's attitude to brands will be affected on how they have handled this crisis. Now, it may well be that if you're not used to, as a business, not used to, you know, implementing a communications plan, it can be quite alien to you. But there is an awful lot of common sense involved, and I think that, you know, it's very easy to say create dialogue and talk to people and whatever. It sounds very pat, but it does need to be implemented in a structured way. And, you know, we already see situations where companies, for example, that have done something locally, you know, that you know, certainly underpins their CSR credentials. You know, they've maybe helped out a local community enterprise or an NHS charity or something like that. That is all played very well for these companies. And Jeremy mentioned earlier on as well about talking to government. But as a business, you know, it shouldn't be forgotten that, you know, informing your local decision makers, either your local MP or even councillor, if you're an employer or whatever, that, you know, informing them as you go along what is happening with your business, that they will appreciate that update, and also they will be aware of your presence within the community.
Great, thanks, Ramsay. So I think there's hopefully some good points for the members. Do feel free to use the chat function if you've any follow-on questions. As we start to sort of come out of the lockdown, one of the big questions we're going to have is really around the order book that we went into the lockdown with, and I guess, you know, again, there's a number of, as you're thinking about your scenarios, there's a number of questions that arise out of that. Will the customer still require their orders, or are you going to get some order cancellations? And of course, what impact does that have on your stock and where they were in the cycle? When they will actually need their order, which plainly has a big impact on labour and materials, particularly if supply chains are stretched. And last but not least, I think there's one that's sort of coming down, or potentially coming down the line at us, for items that were not intended for delivery during the lockdown, but are required soon after, that may result in either an unsatisfied customer or worse still, some form of penalty clause or breach of contract if you can't, as a supplier, make those deliveries. So, Alan, I know it's a really wide topic, and again, much of it would be set out by the contract of sales. But how may you know, the people on the call start to think about how they might prepare and start planning for the issues that come out of the backlog.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Your contract will set out the obligations of the parties, and I think for most of the members, it will be a contract of supply of goods. There are going to be an enormous amount of contracts breached as a result of the legislation which presently restricts movement of people. So in order to resolve breaches of contract, it starts with a dialogue, and it will start with, we need this, when can we get it? I think there will be a measure of understanding in the business community about, with such a period of inactivity on a practical level, just how practical is it to fulfill delivery times and such like. So the starting point is that if there is a breach of contract during lockdown, so separating it into two issues is, at the moment, can you perform the obligations of the contract? Well, no, we can't. And why not? Is it because we don't want to? Is it because we have done something wrong? Well, no, it's not. It's because the government have brought in legislation making it a criminal offence to perhaps leave your home to do something which is non-essential. On that basis, you would have a defence to any breach of your obligations on the basis of being to perform the contract obligations would be, sorry for the Latin phrase, but ultra vires, which is that you cannot enforce an obligation which breaks the law. Now, the concept of delivering furniture breaking the law is something that will not have been considered in the standard terms and conditions, so it won't be provided for. But the common law of ultra vires would apply there, and therefore it would give any breaching party a bit of a shield. Once the restrictions are lifted, then this is open to interpretation. I think there will be some litigation at a high level in court, so that the courts will make a statement about non-performance of obligations as a result of this. But after the restrictions are lifted, it is the way I see the justiciary looking at this, which will filter down into common practice, will be, well, okay, you were supposed to deliver these within 28 days or pay within this amount of time. If you were to freeze it during the period of legal restriction, then you kind of move it forward onto, well, okay, what is reasonable delivery times, payment times, etc., now that the restrictions are lifted. And I take the view that there will be a bit of leeway granted by the courts to the extent that, well, okay, it would be 28 days from order to supply in the ordinary course, but for 3 months worth of business interruption, should that be extended a little bit longer? So I think that if you were to take cases to the court where there has been a breach and ask the court to enforce the breach, the court will be acting, I think they'll be viewing it more reasonable against a backdrop of an unprecedented situation. The courts will start to fill up with this sort of thing, but long before that, customers will need to be talking to each other, and you will avoid the court if both parties act reasonably. If you need something and you're desperate for it, I'm sure the supplier will be desperate to supply it where possible. And I think it's about managing and setting expectations, and that generally does keep you out of the courts.
Great. Ramsay, anything to add on that?
I think that's absolutely spot on from Alan. Is anything to keep you out of the courts. That is absolutely the objective that should be set. But also, and talking about a point that you raised, Mark, about hanging on to clients in the longer term, that it's managing those customers, those clients, those stakeholders, and whatever, that and if you are shown to be both compassionate without being weak in a business sense, but also understanding of their situation, basically showing that you are a class act, then that will stand your business in good stead. And there is evidence of that already. So there are a number, and also procedures that businesses are putting in place that may be of interest to customers. For example, if a business is going to reopen, informing customers that it is reopening and it is now trading again, what steps has that company put in place to ensure the safety of its staff, ensure the continuity of the business, that type of thing. I was talking to a client yesterday who had managed to secure testing kits. Now, it's in its infancy at the moment, but it's not unreasonable to envisage a situation, for example, that companies further down the line who have been able to get antibody testing kits and whatever are shown to be acting responsibly or whatever. So it all feeds into this. Are you a trusted voice? Are you a responsible enterprise?
Mark, if I could just come back, there's probably one point I didn't quite cover off in talking about mine, what I was talking about moments ago, is about cancelled orders. I'm talking about maybe not fulfilling obligations on the time scale set by the contract. Cancelled orders are going to be, I would imagine, fairly commonplace. I think when Jeremy was talking about hospitality, for example, being the last ones to come out of it, there's also going to be quite a lot of insolvencies. Now, the insolvencies will take care of themselves. If you were supposed to supply some goods to a company which has entered liquidation or administration, then it's a case of, that contract is effectively breached and you would be entitled to payment. But if they've gone into liquidation or administration, you're simply lodging your claim with the administrator and the liquidator, and pennies in the pound will follow. The scenario which I think would be of most interest would be, the customer hasn't entered into liquidation. In fact, they're desperately trying to avoid it, but they no longer have a requirement for all of the furniture or other goods that were ordered. And they just cancel that on you. There is no guidance from the court as to how that will be looked upon as yet, but the starting point would be, well, what are what does the contract say about cancellation? And ordinarily there will be some sort of penalty. Now, on the face of it, you absolutely have the right to enforce that, but I think everyone should just consider how that may be looked at. Again, in this similar premise as to what the courts may consider about that, but your contract will provide for payment and penalty, etc. What I would recommend, though, on the basis that if you're a supplier rather than a manufacturer, it may be worth, if you have a cancelled order, going back to the manufacturer and seeing what, if anything, they can do, and that they may take it back for further resale, etc. There's often three parties in a line in the contract, so your contract may be to supply to an end user, but you will have a contract with the manufacturer yourself. So a three-way dialogue in these unfortunate scenarios, which aren't the fault necessarily of the end user, are very useful. Fundamentally, yes, your contract will allow you to go and litigate, but keeping the theme of discussing with every party which is affected is often a good place to start.
Right, it's a good point, Alan. Okay, so I think we do want to respect everybody's time, so I think we're probably a little too short on time to ask a final question. So I'm going to bring the webinar to a close. So first of all, thanks very much to everybody that joined the call. I'm sorry the videos didn't work this time. We will have another practice run at that. It worked in practice, not in reality. We'll have another run at that before next week's webinar to make sure that we can have all of the speakers clearly seen. We hope you've enjoyed the first BCFA business webinar on surviving COVID-19 and found it enjoyable and informative. If you have any suggestions for future topics or indeed improvements to the webinar beyond obviously having the videos running, please do not hesitate to send us your thoughts via Nadia at the BCFA. Outside of that, of course, I'd like to thank Alan, Jeremy, and Ramsay for making the time this morning to join the call. I think there was some really great input for everybody, and I hope you've all got something out of it to take back to your businesses as you start to think about what comes next. Our next webinar will be in a week's time, and we'll be focusing on the issue of retaining your customers and actually maximizing opportunities for the future, and how you may start to rethink your business model as we look into the new world. The other thing I'd just like to mention, just for all the members on the call, there will be, from the BCFA, there will be a survey going out, I think, Jeremy, on Monday, which is a quick survey on how the COVID-19 lockdown is impacting your business and how you see it impacting in the future, and what are the key concerns you may have. So please do respond to the survey, and we will get the results to that out as quickly as we can. So once again, thanks very much for joining. I wish everybody as good a weekend as we can all have in these strange times, and I look forward to carrying this on next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.